So let's talk about what healthy grieving is and how it happens. The first phase of grieving is avoidance or shock. Some people call it denial. But in the case of death, it's difficult to actually deny that a death has occurred. You can deny that a breakup has occurred. You can deny that this breakup is forever or that you'll never get back together. There's a lot of things you can deny if the loss is not death. But if you're going to go on to grieving and doing it in a healthy manner, the first thing you need to do is accept it. So the first step is to acknowledge that a loss has occurred. The second step is to acknowledge the magnitude and extent of the loss. And the third step is to understand that the loss must be actively grieved. Dr. Therese Rando said that when people first start to feel the feelings of loss, many times people want to go back to denial. It's easier to live in denial than to deal with these very, very deep feelings. So sometimes the acknowledgement phase, especially if it's around a breakup, especially if it's in a relationship where there's been many breakups, the acknowledgement phase might actually be a time where you're floating in and out of dealing with reality. But at this point, many people just put the emotions aside. You may or may not have to actually deal with the emotions. Maybe this loss isn't real. Maybe this relationship will come back. Maybe people will stay in denial for a long time. So after you accept the fact that there's been a loss, and even if you're a person who wants to think about reconciliation, whether you reconcile or not, the relationship that you had has to be dead because it didn't work. So you have to grieve it no matter what. Even if you and this person get back together, the relationship that you had, that didn't work. That got you to where you are right now, did not work. It has to be grieved no matter what. So whether or not you think you might actually get back together, that's beside the point. It doesn't matter, because whether you get back together or not, you have to put that old relationship aside. It can't work. It didn't work. It doesn't work, and you need to grieve it. The emotions of grief are sorrow, anger, guilt, anxiety, confusion. And these emotions can be overwhelming at times. And many times people feel as if they're temporarily disabled. Therese Rando studies complicated mourning, and she calls grief a roller coaster ride of emotion with foreign feelings and a confused sense of self. And that's exactly how it feels. It just feels like the earth is moving beneath your feet and you can't quite get right with anything. The first waves of emotion are usually sudden, strong, and unpredictable. Colin Murray Parks called them grief pangs. Grief pangs are episodes of severe anxiety and psychological pain. At such time, the lost people, the lost relationships are strongly missed. And sometimes the emotional pain is so severe, the person will cry out for the person that they lost. Acknowledging the person that was lost can sometimes cause someone to be swept up in a feeling of deep, intense, and inconsolable sorrow. Sometimes the emotion is so great that people fear losing control or going crazy. I've had more than one client say to me over the years, I'm afraid that if I start crying, I'll never stop. I'm afraid that I'm just going to lose my mind. I'm afraid of just losing it. The human body can only cry for so long. So you will stop crying. It is physically impossible to continue to cry and not ever stop. It's never been recorded, never happened. But you have to welcome it and you have to acknowledge it. You have to say it's okay. You have to understand that the sorrowful, painful, bit by bit letting go is what is absolutely necessary for you to getting beyond this loss. You absolutely must understand that you have to review the complex, multi-dimensional image of the lost loved one. You must review the person that was in your life, the relationship that was in your life, in order to let it go. And when you review that relationship, it often results in a buffeting of emotion. But this very strong, very deep, very intense emotion that happens, it must be felt if you're going to have a good outcome, meaning you're going to complete your loss. This great expression of emotion is psychologically necessary, yet it's what people fear most and try to avoid. But there is no resolution of grief without giving into this great deal of emotion. Dr. Therese Rando said that when you're feeling anger and hostility, it's a natural consequence of feeling deprived of something that you valued. Many times people get angry at someone who passed away. I mean, the person didn't want to pass away. Wasn't their idea. They'd stay here if they could, but they couldn't. And people get very guilty about feeling angry at the person who has passed away. It's part of the package. What happens? It's okay. Don't judge yourself for being angry. Whenever we feel deprivation, we feel anger. But sometimes people will not expect any kind of anger. They'll experience this unexpected rage or fury. And they might not feel it at the person, but they feel it at their circumstances, at how things were left, at unresolved losses. The anger is even toward those who say, person wasn't good to you, they weren't worth it, let them go. Many times when we're in this initial feeling of anger, especially after a breakup, we will misplace and displace our anger onto other people. And many times we will suddenly start lashing out at people who didn't think that relationship was good for us to begin with. We'll say, well, you didn't want me with them anyway. I hope you're happy now, blah, blah, blah. It's like we become like bitter towards people that only wanted the best for us because we decided that they were right and we needed to give up this bad relationship, and now we're mad at everybody. All the people that wanted what's best for us, we're mad at all of them. But, Colin Murray Parks talked about the anger not being an emotion that the proper British widows were used to feeling. And the women in his studies all felt as if a proper British widow did not express anger. So what he was able to observe in this group was general irritability and bitterness. None of them really got angry. None of them really raised their voice. So check yourself if you're feeling anger and not allowing yourself to express that anger, being irritable or being bitter. We don't want to get stuck in bitterness. That we don't want to do. The next thing is guilt. Guilt is a normal part of the grief process. After a death, many times the guilt is about what was done, what was not done, what was said, what was not said. And in my earlier podcast that I do on guilt, shoulda, woulda, coulda, I will leave a link to that podcast in the show notes. But in that podcast, I talk about how we just lambaste ourselves afterwards, going over and over, shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda. And it doesn't change anything. It's not worth anything. It's not helping anyone do anything. But there is this persistent feeling of being incomplete or dissatisfied with the close of the relationship. So the guilt comes from a sense of wanting to have done things differently. It also, like I talk about in the shoulda, woulda, coulda episode, it's also about magical thinking. The guilt stems from, I think I could change things if I only was given the chance. And that's wishful thinking. That is not necessarily the way it's going to go. Guilt comes from not being able to accept what happened and a misguiding sense of having power over the situation. If only I had done this, this would happen. It's this wishful thinking, and you have no idea if you actually had been given that chance, you have no idea if it would change things. You have no idea at all. And even if it could have changed things, it's too late now. You can't do anything about it now. Many times the guilt and living in the if onlys and the shoulda, woulda, could is all about magical thinking we have more power than we do. And this misguided belief that we can have power over the situation, that if only we had done the right thing, everything would be fine now. And we have no way of knowing that that's true. If a loved one passes away, we will very often have survivor guilt and guilt for not being able to help them. And then some people feel guilty that they're not able to get on with life. And other people feel guilty because they are getting on with life. So it's the guilt plays a role in almost everyone's grief work, whether it's a loved one passing away or it's the end of a relationship. Almost everybody goes through some amount of guilt or belief that if only I had done this, things wouldn't be so bad right now. When Calamari Parks studied the widows, he said that the widows in his study repeatedly reviewed the events leading up to the death, as if by doing so, they could undo or alter the events that had occurred. So in addition to survivor guilt and guilt for being helpless, some feel guilty for not having done the right thing. Some feel guilty because they're sad. Others feel guilty because they're not able to get on with life. Others are guilty because they're getting on with life. People will find a million different reasons. The only thing that guilt is good for is to instruct you as to future behavior. That's the only thing it's good for. There is no sense in doing a bunch of mea culpas for things that you cannot change. So let go of the guilt and the self-torture because it's not fair and it's not okay and it's not going to help you get on with the grief process. The other thing that happens in grief is profound confusion and disorganization. Even though Freud said it's very unreal, like at the period of mourning, Freud said, is very unreal, but it's not a malady. But it feels that way. It feels like a malady. Because you are confused, you are disorganized, you are forgetful, you are accident prone, you are walking into things. When you are actively grieving, you are highly distractible, disoriented, dazed, and less effective in everyday life. Beverly Raphael said, at the earliest stage of the psychological mourning process, the bereaved's whole external world appears to be one of disorganization. The power of reasoning seems to be distorted, and there's a lot of increased stress when mundane tasks such as shopping or going to the bank becomes very difficult. It makes people feel drained and question if they're losing their mind or their grip on reality. It's like I only wanted to go to the store and I don't know what I came in here for and I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what's going on and I'm blah, 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 blah. Many times it's this disorganization, this feeling of being confused, of feeling muddled, of feeling fuzzy, of feeling distractible, of feeling accident prone, is what causes a person to put themselves back together before they're ready. Because this is scary. I mean, if you've ever walked in front of a car while you're actively grieving, you know that it's scary. It's a scary place to find yourself. It's a scary place where you just don't seem to know from one day to the next what it is you're doing. So people will rush to deal with whatever it is because they don't want to feel this way anymore, when the thing to do is to get a good planner, to make lists, to help. In the workbook, I talk about putting stopgap measures in place so that you can honor your forgetfulness right now. It's part of the process. You're doing good. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Let the forgetfulness be okay. Use a list. Use a calendar. Use this. Use that. Use whatever you need to use to help you get through each day with the confusion and the disorganization. There are many different tools that you can use to become organized, to give yourself reminders, to help yourself in everyday life while you're in sort of this weakened state where you're not really sure what it is you're doing from day to day. We talked about pining and searching. We talked about pining and searching with Colin Murray Parks and Conran Lorenz and their studies, which are absolutely fascinating. And Colin Murray Parks said in Human Bereavement, there is this same kind of searching behavior that the geese had exhibited. Many times after death, a person will attempt to call the deceased on the phone or scan the crowds looking for them. John Bowlby said that this behavior is part of the refusal to consciously accept the permanence of the loss. For some people, it's the desire to exert rational behavior into irrational circumstances. John Bowlby said that the searching may happen unceasingly or episodically. You might be continually searching, or you just might go through it from time to time. And we see that with people coming off of breakups. There are some times where all of a sudden you just want to go creep in your ex's social media. You just want to. It just comes up one day. It's episodic. It's like, oh, let me see what he or she is doing now. And we don't need to do that, but it's normal to want to do that. One of the things that Freud had talked about was, in order for mourning to be successful, all previously uncommunicated appreciation, resentment, and regret must be communicated. And the person who is in mourning, the person who is going through the grief, must become rigorously honest in dealing with the loss. This is why Getting Past Your Breakup talks about doing the journaling and doing the relationship inventory. For the grief process to be successful, you must express all of the emotion, whether you like it or not. You have to tolerate your disorganization and the urge to search without actually searching. If your loved one is alive and well and in another relationship, and you just sit with it and it goes away. If you engage in searching behavior, if you contact your ex, if you creep their social media, if you do whatever it is you want to do, when the searching comes up, you will stay stuck in that. But if you sit with it, you'll let it pass, it will happen, it will go away, it will be less as time goes on. Just keep resisting the urge to search. And then go to your journaling, go to your relationship inventory, go to your goodbye letter, and communicate all of your appreciation, all of your resentment, all of your regret. Communicate everything you need to communicate and be rigorously honest about it. Everything. Hold nothing back. It must have the authority as if we are having a conversation. And by that, what I usually suggest to clients, people in groups, is you have to acknowledge things that were left unsaid. Even though in the closure video and in the closure podcast, I talk about there are no questions that you could possibly ask that you would get an answer to that would satisfy you. So let's forget about that. It's not about asking questions. It's about saying everything that needs to be said. It's about, I love you, I care about you, I loved you, I was good to you, you treated me badly, you suck, I hate you, I'm sorry for blah, blah, blah. All of that together, yes. And you can have somebody, like, even if this person did things that were 10 times more terrible to you than you ever did to them, you still need to apologize and make amends for what you did to them. That's how you come out of grieving. That's how you come out of resolving the loss, is you allow it all of the expression, you allow it all of the emotion, and you allow it all of the communication. If anything is left unsaid, grieving cannot be resolved. You must make sure that everything is said. And then the final phase is accepting, reorganizing, and integrating the loss. And this is something that is not a final destination. It's something you will come into the final phase, acceptance, reorganization, integration, and you will have a day where you'll feel like, wow, this feels great. I love this. I feel good. I feel great. I'm moving on. And then the day after that, you're in the soup again, feeling all horrible and terrible as if you just had the breakup all over again. This is the final phase of grief. You will go in and out of the final phase of grief a few times before it's really final. The acceptance is not a happy state, but it's rather the end of a long search for peace. Accepting the loss doesn't mean forgetting or never feeling sad again, but it's a turning point that signals the final phase of grief has begun. Recovery from loss depends not on a denial of the loss, but on the painful acceptance of what cannot be changed. After the difficult feelings have been felt, after the disorganization has been tolerated, there is often the first glimpse of acceptance. Even though all the emotions will reemerge after you first start to feel that acceptance, and you'll experience many of the emotions of the middle phase of grief, you will experience them more than once. The acceptance phase will return again. In time, the periods of peacefully accepting the loss will last longer than the periods of sorrow. During the last phase, you start to understand what the heck happened here when you work through a loss, and you really work through it. And many times, if you've gone through the relationship inventory, then you've gone through the life inventory, many times you have worked through a few losses at once. Many times when we're grieving the loss of our relationship, we're also grieving secondary losses. The loss of a friend, the loss of mutual friends, the loss of hopes and dreams, the loss of their kids, the loss of their family, whatever it is. We will have secondary losses, and we have to accept them. So sometimes it's a matter of not only am I accepting the grief that comes from having lost the relationship, but I'm also accepting the secondary losses that happened. When you have worked through a significant loss, like a breakup, like a divorce, like a separation, like a death, whatever it is, when you've worked through it, when you've done the work that GPYB suggests, it's been 100 years since Freud wrote Mourning and Melancholia, and we don't have his teachings just from that one paper that's over 100 years old. We don't even have those teachings down. And there's so many other ones that we need to get down. We can't even get like basic grieving down. Freud said when the grief work is complete, a new, redefined interpsychic relationship is possible. Meaning you have integrated this relationship and this person into your being, into your experience, and now you're just going to move on without the painful flashbacks. This is when Freud said that deference for reality gains the day, meaning that grieving is completed and we are now moving on. If you've gone through the Getting Past Your Breakup program, you know that you have to balance self-care with grief. That Freud recognized that grief is the painful bit by bit letting go. The grief process involves a difficult struggle. Definitive of the work of grief is the struggle between wanting to hold on and needing to let go. Freud said it's carried through slowly under great expense of time and cathartic energy. And because of that, Freud said, the person attempts to modify, delay, inhibit, or stop the process before it is complete. And when that happens, the pathological variant develops. In order to get through the great expense of time and cathartic energy, it's slow. Understand that the grief process is slow. Understand that it's necessary to stop and start and stop and start and take care of yourself. One of the most important things that came out of Mourning and Melancholia is Freud's recognition of the fact that grief is a process that involves a difficult struggle. definitive of the work of mourning is the great struggle between wanting to hold on but needing to let go. Freud said this work of grief is carried through slowly under great expense of time and cathartic energy. You don't feel normal. And Freud said because it is such a departure from normal living that people who are experiencing grief want to modify, delay, inhibit, or stop it. And that's when it becomes pathological. And everybody has these unresolved losses that they're not dealing with because the work is so difficult. But what you really need to do is self-care while you are grieving. When I started this program, which wasn't a program, it was just what I was doing for myself to get over not only a divorce, but all of the pain that I had gone through in my entire life. And it all came raining down on me at once. So when I first started it, I went to therapy every week, and within a few short weeks, my therapist had turned me on to the idea of a me night. And she had originally titled it Date Night with Myself. And that was my night where after the kids went to bed, I would take a nice long bubble bath, and then I'd get into bed early with some nice comfy pajamas and some novel. I made sure that on the day of my self-care, I didn't do any self-help work. I didn't go to any meetings. I didn't go to therapy. I didn't do anything on that day. Originally, I started out doing the me nights on Thursday nights. And the reason I had started with the me nights was my therapist kept telling me that the amount of work that I was doing, and I was reading everything all at once. Like I was reading Adult Children of Alcoholics by Janet Woditz. I was reading Women Who Love Too Much, Men Who Hate Women, Codependent No More, Beyond Codependency, John Bradshaw on the Family, John Bradshaw, Healing the Shame That Binds You. I was going to all kinds of support meetings and all kinds of seminars and workshops. And this is the thing that I tell people when they are doing this work. You have to go where recovery happens. And you have to do a mixture of community or 12-step support meetings. They're free. You go, you meet people, and it's good. And then seminars now and again, if there's an author that you want to hear or a book that helped you and you want to find out if the author has more offerings, like I do and some of the other authors do, you find out where they're speaking, where they're giving a seminar, where they're giving a workshop, and you go there, or you find out what they have online. And then there's the things that you save up for. And I was a single mom when I was doing this work, and I saw John Bradshaw, I saw Stephen Levine, I studied with John James, I saw Melody Beattie speak, I went to a paid Women Who Love Too Much group. It was a great group. And later on, I actually ran a couple of Women Who Love Too Much groups, and I've actually done one on the internet. So if you go to Getting Past Your Breakup, it says that the path to healing has three main destinations: taking care of yourself, working out the grief, and dealing with challenges. Now, taking care of yourself is the me nights, it's the affirmations, it's the positive self-talk, and all of that makes up self-care. The work of grief is a painful bit-by-bit letting go that happens slowly and at great expense of time and cathartic energy. That sums up the grief process. And the reason why people have so much trouble with it is because they don't stop and take care of themselves. And this is something that I work with people on all the time. I tell people that when you first have a breakup, it's really a good idea to be very gentle with yourself in the first couple of weeks. Just let your emotions come. If you've got some time off from work, take it. Give yourself time to relax and rest and cry, walk the floors, wring your hands, whatever you have to do at the very beginning of your grief process. That's what you need to be doing. But you must balance it with self-care. You absolutely can't do it without the self-care. Now, one thing that I've told people is that when I was working back when I was first doing my grief work and I was first doing grief groups, I took part in one, and then I ran one, and then I trained with John James of the Grief Recovery Institute. But I had a team meeting in another building in my job every day at 1 o'clock. The team was scattered all over the world. There were people in Scotland, people in China, people everywhere. So we would meet at 1 o'clock, and I would have to drive from my building to the building where the meeting took place. And that was probably about a half an hour away. And this was the year that my mother died and my dog died, and I was having a really difficult time. And I would cry from my building to the other building and back every day, twice a day. And I would put on sad songs so that I would be able to control my grieving, because my kids were pretty little at the time, and I had to go home. I had to cook dinner. I had to do extracurricular activities they had and things like that. So I really didn't have the opportunity at night to do my grieving. I would do some grieving driving home, but for the most part, I had to think about what I needed to be doing when I got home. So the kids needed to be anywhere, what needed to be going. I had a very busy after work life at the time that this happened. So it was best for me to do my crying in the car between buildings. Later on, after my husband Michael passed, I would be working all day, and I would be 12, 15-hour long days. And at the end, I would just be all bottled up because I would have kept the grief patted down all day. And I get in the car and I put on this CD that I had made with a bunch of sad songs, and I would just sob all the way home. And then when I hit the garage door opener, that was my cue to go inside, have a meal, have a shower, go to bed, and take care of myself. I had this Pavlovian response. Getting in the car, put on this CD, I cry. Hit the garage door opener, I stop crying. I would say out loud to myself in the car, I'm going inside, I'm going to make myself a nice meal, I'm going to take a shower. I had all kinds of lavender products. I had lavender demister, lavender candles, lavender soap thing. Lavender is very soothing, and anxiety is one of the ways that my grief always manifests itself. So I like things like lavender that are very calming and very soothing. So I would go, I'd check in with the kids, I'd have something to eat, I'd go in, I'd take a shower, take a long bath if I had time, my lavender products, and then I had these sheep headphones, where it's like a soft headband. There's a page on the gettingpastyourbreakup.com website. It's called GPYB Recommends, and it's about authors and books and other things that we recommend, but it's also some self-care products. And I put these headphones on that self-care page because it really helped me a lot. It was one of those finds that you're glad you found. So I would take Stephen and Andrea Levine, their grief process, and I would put it on. And I actually attended that weekend that's on that particular recording of theirs. I actually attended that very weekend in the 90s when they recorded it. So I would put those on, and by the end of the first grief meditation, which happens pretty early in the program, I would be asleep. And the audio would just be playing in my ear all night long. And because it was on this nice little fleece headband, it didn't bother me, and I was able to sleep. But I was listening to all of the grief, all the wisdom, the meditation, everything from Stephen and Andrea on that thing. I would listen to it all night long through my headphones, and it really helped me a lot. So then I would get up in the morning, go to work, and do it all over again. But I would spend time on the weekend. I would get a massage. I would go to a spa. I would do things that I really needed to do to keep me in shape. I was grieving harder than I had ever grieved anything in my entire life. And some days it was just really, really hard. And sometimes I would rent
a movie on the weekend, a movie that Michael and I enjoyed together a lot, and I would watch it, and I would sit there, and I would cry, and I would miss him, and I would wrap myself up in his blankets, and the smell of him was going away. First pass, I could still smell him on his pillow and his blankets and everything, and after a while, those scents start to go away, and I was missing him and grieving him all over again, and I would be huddled in the blankets and just sobbing, and then I would think, okay, now I have to go get a massage or something, like I'm really, really grieving. And the more you're grieving and the harder it is, the more self-care you absolutely must have. I started to have it at night, on the weekends. I would be carving out all kinds of time for grieving and taking care of myself. When you've had a big, tremendous loss like that and you're grieving as hard as you are and you're just feeling taken over by your emotions over and over again, you want to get it out. You want to lean into it. Know that it won't last forever. Know that you're not going crazy. Know that it's a normal, natural part of healing. Know that it's necessary. Know that you have to do this and do it. But make sure that you take care of yourself while you're doing it. You absolutely, absolutely, absolutely cannot get through the great emotions of grief if you don't do the self-care. So that is the grief process from Freud forward. If you know someone who is struggling with loss, either recently or long ago, please let them know about the grief process. It is a process and it happens in phases, not in stages. There are 3 main phases: shock and denial, review and relinquishment, acceptance and integration. Those are the 3 big phases, and you could go into and out of each one of those, especially if it's a breakup. And in the middle is where the review and relinquishment happens, and it is a very slow, painful, bit by bit letting go, and you're not going crazy, you're not losing your mind, you will get over this. This is the way out. So please don't shit on yourselves. I should be better. I should feel different. I should this. I should that. Grief is the only known shared experience that every adult human can have in common with another adult. But we don't use the experience of grief to hold us together in our shared humanity. Instead, we use it to push each other away. Oh, you lost somebody? Well, I haven't dealt with all my losses, so I really don't want to talk to you about it. Stephen Levine said people who have done their grief work are the happiest and lightest of beings. And that is because when you do your grief work, you understand that you have basically taken this terrible loss and you have done something. You've gone through it. You've gone through the emotions. You weren't afraid. You courageously stood there and handled all of the emotions of grief, all of the emotions, all the anger, all the hurt, all the preoccupation, all the obsession, all the wanting to contact your ex that you just sit on your hands, do it, the disorganization, the confusion, the sleepless nights, the times when you're not quite sure what it is you're doing, and you have just been capable of getting through this loss. And that will make you a very happy, healthy human being. And it might not feel that way when you're crying and walking the floors at night and wringing your hands. But now you know the grief process. You know how it happens. You know that you go back into the times of great emotion, that you will suddenly go think you're okay, and then all of a sudden you're not okay, and then you'll feel you're not okay, then all of a sudden you are okay. It's a process. Please, please, please educate anyone that you know about the grief process, because it is the only shared human experience that we can actually talk to each other about and help each other through. We really can't help each other with being born. That's usually a finite set of people that do that. And we don't help each other when it's time for us to die. Usually the whole world isn't involved in it. The only shared human experience that you can talk about, that you can educate others about, that you can process through yourself about, is the grief process. And if you cut it short, you're going to have unresolved grief, And then the next time you have a breakup or a loss, you're going to have to deal with this breakup then. So stop with the unresolved losses and do your grief work. You can do this, and you will come out on the other side a happier and healthier human being. You can do this. Please, please, please allow yourself the time and the space to resolve this loss and any other ones that are coming up as you're doing this work. You can do this. You can absolutely do this. Please become happy, whole, and healthy, and pass it on to others that there is a way out. And that way is through. You have to go through the grief work, and then you come out on the other side. You can do this. Take care, everybody. I want to thank you all for your reviews and for your best wishes and for wishing me well. And I really appreciate the support that I've gotten from everybody. So I really, really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, guys. And please send me mail. Please continue to review the podcast. And please let me know how you're doing. Take care, all. Bye-bye.